He was sitting at my kitchen table, wrapped in one of my old towels, wearing a faded baseball t-shirt I'd pulled from a donation box in the garage. The rain outside had quieted to a drizzle, but the wind still howled against the windows, rattling them like impatient hands. He held his palms around a steaming cup of tea I'd made without asking, just chamomile, something calm in a night that wasn't. His wallet lay on the table, drying beside the kettle, and when I picked it up to hand it back, a small photo slipped out. It fell face down, glossy side catching the yellow light from the lamp, and when I turned it over, I saw a little boy with a paper crown, maybe 7, grinning despite a thin white tube that ran from his nose under his shirt. The kind of smile that hits you somewhere deep, a little defiant, a little fragile. On the back, written in messy blue ink, it said, Evan 7, in case of emergency call Dad, and then a phone number with my area code. Underneath that, smaller, he gets scared when it thunders. I froze. He noticed. His eyes flicked to mine, then to the photo, then away again. For a moment, he looked less like a stranger and more like a man trying very hard not to break. And I remember thinking that the storm outside wasn't half as loud as the silence between us. It had started just a few hours earlier. The sky had been strange all afternoon, a deep greenish gray that pressed down on the rooftops like a held breath. You live in a small town long enough, you know when a storm's going to turn ugly. The air feels thick, electric, like it's holding something back. I'd been closing the windows one by one when the power flickered, then died. A second later came the first crack of thunder, loud enough to shake the dishes in the cabinet. The rain followed fast, slamming against the porch in hard, slanted sheets. That's when I heard it, the knocking. At first, I thought it was the wind, or maybe a loose shutter. But it came again, 3 short raps, deliberate, uneven, desperate. I hesitated. No one knocks during a storm out here. We don't get visitors after dark, and we definitely don't open our doors to strangers. I stood there for a second, hand on the knob, heart thudding, trying to convince myself to ignore it. But something, maybe habit, maybe decency, made me look through the peephole. He was there. Soaked, shivering, his hair plastered to his forehead, his coat hanging heavy and dark. He was maybe mid-30s, tall, with that lost look of someone who'd taken the wrong turn and kept going anyway. When he saw me peek, he raised a hand, half wave, half plea. "I'm sorry," he called over the wind. "My car, it died. I didn't know where else to go." His voice cracked, maybe from the cold, maybe from something else. I remember thinking, you could be lying. But you could also be drowning out there. I opened the door just a little. The rain immediately blew in, cold and sharp. "There's a motel 2 miles down the road," I said. He shook his head. I tried. "They're full. Power's out everywhere." His teeth were chattering. His lips were almost blue. Against my better judgment, I opened the door wider. "All right," I sighed. "Come in. But leave your shoes by the door." He stepped inside, dripping a small puddle onto the rug, and for a moment neither of us spoke. The storm filled the silence, thunder rolling low like a warning. I fetched a towel, then an old shirt. He thanked me, polite, quiet, the kind of voice that doesn't quite fit a man his size. I told him to sit, make himself warm. He said his name was Mark. Just Mark. No last name, no questions asked. For a while, it was fine. We didn't talk much. I made tea. He said he'd been visiting someone in the next town and took the back road home. That road floods fast when it rains like this. I told him he was lucky he hadn't been swept into the creek. He smiled at that, a small, tired curve of his mouth. Said luck hadn't really been his thing lately. There was a strange calm between us, that quiet awkwardness when 2 strangers share a space too small for comfort, but too kind for distance. He noticed the framed photos on my counter, my husband, David, smiling with a fishing rod, me and my sister at a county fair, a few of the dog I used to have. He didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer answers. But when the thunder cracked again, louder this time, he flinched hard. It wasn't subtle. The cup rattled in his hands. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded too quickly. "Yeah, just loud." He said it like a reflex. I let it go. It was maybe an hour later when I went to throw his soaked wallet into the dryer on low heat. That's when the photo fell out. That's when everything shifted. I stared at that boy's face, the little note on the back, the handwriting that looked rushed, personal, like something written in a hospital hallway. I looked at the phone number, my area code. My stomach twisted. Something about the words "he gets scared when it thunders" wouldn't leave me. It felt like a whisper that had traveled too far and found the wrong set of ears. When I came back into the kitchen, he was staring at the storm again. Lightning flashed, lighting up his face for a split second, and I could see tears on his cheeks, or maybe rain he hadn't wiped away. I placed the wallet on the table between us. "You dropped something," I said. He didn't look at it. "Thank you," he murmured. Then, softer, "You shouldn't have to deal with this. I'll be out of your way as soon as the rain stops." I should have left it there. Should have said, "Okay," and gone back to my tea. But something about that photo wouldn't let me. "Who's Evan?" I asked quietly. His hand froze on the mug. He didn't look up. For a long moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, finally, he said, "My son." Just 2 words, simple, flat, but they carried the kind of weight that bends a person's back. "Is he okay?" I asked, instantly regretting it because I already knew the answer wasn't simple. He let out a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. "He was," he said. "A while ago." He swallowed hard. He used to hate storms. We'd sit in the hallway with blankets when it thundered. I told him thunder was just the sky clapping for him. His eyes flicked up at me, red-rimmed but steady. He believed me. The kettle clicked behind me, long forgotten. The storm outside rumbled again. And I realized this man hadn't come here by accident. Not in the cosmic sense, not fate, but something in him had needed a door to knock on tonight. I didn't ask for more. Sometimes grief needs silence more than sympathy. I just sat across from him, letting the rain speak for both of us. But when he looked at me again, there was something else there, not danger, not menace, just a kind of unbearable guilt. And that was what scared me more than the thunder ever could. He didn't add anything else, and I didn't push. The storm had that way of squeezing words out of you that weren't ready to be said, and I had learned the hard way that prying at grief is like picking at a fresh seam, it only tears more. I slid the photo back toward him, face up, because something in me felt he needed to see his boy smiling again, even if the smile only lasted a heartbeat before the next roll of thunder. He glanced down, then turned the picture over, as if the handwriting was a safer thing to look at than the child. "We used to write on the backs," he said, so soft I almost missed it, "so anyone could help if we got separated in a store." He thought it made him brave. His thumb hovered over the words "he gets scared when it thunders" like he could smooth the fear out by touch. The power hiccuped back on with a tired click, the kitchen light briefly brightening then settling, the old fridge humming like a loyal dog relieved to be useful again. The normal sounds, appliances waking, a distant branch thumping the siding, the rattle of the vent, made the room feel less like a confession booth. I asked if he'd eaten. He shook his head, so I pulled a plastic-wrapped loaf of David's favorite sourdough from the freezer, set it by the oven to thaw. Cracked 2 eggs and whisked them with a pinch of pepper the way my grandmother taught me in a house that had survived storms scarier than this without ever once needing to lock its door. He watched me move around my own kitchen like he was taking a picture in his head, where I kept the salt, which drawer stuck halfway, how I tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear with the back of my wrist when my hands were messy. He offered to help and I told him to sit, that this wasn't a test he needed to pass. We ate standing at the counter because sometimes sitting makes things too formal, and I didn't want him to feel like he owed me conversation to pay for scrambled eggs. He said thank you too many times, like he thought I'd take the plate away if he didn't fill the quiet with gratitude. I asked about his car, and he said he'd left it half a mile down, nose deep in a puddle the road pretends isn't a ditch. I told him in the morning we could get my neighbor's tow chain. He said he didn't want to be a bother. I said that ship had sailed when I gave him my late husband's t-shirt. The corner of his mouth lifted again. It was a good almost smile. The kind that made me think of how much of living is just surviving the in-between parts. When the rain backed off to a steady whisper, I showed him the couch, set a folded blanket on the arm, and made a point of dropping 2 pillows like I meant it. I also put David's old aluminum bat by the door and didn't hide that I did, This is a small town and kindness is cousin to common sense. He understood. You don't have to trust me, he said, not offended, simply stating a fact. You just have to trust that I'm too tired to make trouble. Something about his honesty eased the knot in my chest. I told him where the bathroom was, handed him a toothbrush still in plastic, and pointed out the switch that makes the fan squeal even if you don't want it to. He laughed, and it wasn't the laugh of a man playing at charm. It was short and a little embarrassed, as if laughter was a language he hadn't spoken fluently in a while. I went in my bedroom and closed the door but didn't latch it, a habit I kept after David died because silence with a shut door felt like drowning. I lay there listening, water ticking in the gutters, the house settling its joints, the wind pulling at the eaves, and beneath it, the soft tread of a stranger trying to be weightless on floors that knew every step I'd ever taken. I must have slept because I woke with the sense that something had changed, that subtle hush when the storm finally rolls itself into the next county. The clock blinked 3:11 in a stubborn, blinking blue. I padded to the kitchen and found him at the table again, elbows on wood, head in his hands. The wallet lay open beside him like a patient file. The photo of Evan was propped against the sugar jar. He looked up when he heard me, eyes swollen, but not from new tears, more like from the ones he'd outrun for too long. Sorry, he said. Couldn't sleep. I made more tea because sometimes hot water is the only answer you have to a question that doesn't want one. Do you want to use my phone charger? I asked. Call someone. He shook his head slowly. There's no one at this hour who'd pick up and make me feel better for calling. He tapped the photo with one finger, gentle. He would have. He'd say, Dad, thunder is just the sky clapping for me. He tried to smile with his mouth, his eyes didn't follow. I sat opposite and let the seconds pass. In small towns, silence is a skill, a kind of hospitality. You learn when to let it breathe. Eventually, he said, we used to live 3 towns over. I haven't been back there in a while. He rolled the wallet between his palms, the leather creaking. Tonight I was driving around because I thought that if I kept moving the storm couldn't find me. It wasn't a confession, it was an arithmetic of grief. I told him I knew that drive, the one you take when being in your own house, is like sitting in a memories closet with the lights stuck on. He looked at me then in a way that said he understood I wasn't guessing. Your husband, he asked, not nosy, more like connecting dots politely. 3 years, I said. Heart, and tapped my chest with 2 fingers out of habit, a small-town shorthand for it was sudden. He nodded the way people in our county nod when there's nothing you can add that's useful. He said, I'm sorry, and then, after a beat, he was the one with the fishing pole? I blinked. You noticed, I said, and felt a quick, silly wave of gratitude that he'd looked and seen a life, not just a house to hide in. He told me he used to fish with his son off the bridge on County Road D, before the hospital years. Before the calendar got divided into labs and quiet Wednesday afternoons where nothing hurts and you wonder if normal is coming back or just waving from down the street. He said the word hospital like most people say winter, inevitable, survivable, but unkind. The kettle whistled and I stood to pour, and that's when I asked the thing that had been sitting in my mouth like a pebble I couldn't swallow. Is he? I didn't chase the sentence. He spared me. Gone, he said, the word landing gently, the way a father puts a sleeping child into bed. 2 years. He looked at the photo again. I carry this like a spare lung. We sat there, 2 people who had each lost someone irreplaceable and had kept breathing out of stubbornness or muscle memory or because the dishes still needed washing. Outside, a car passed slowly on the wet road, tires hissing. The town was starting to wake into its damp, normal self. He rubbed his palms together like they hurt. You probably want me gone by morning. I told him he didn't have to ghost himself out the door, that decent people can last through breakfast. I make French toast when the power returns, I said. It's a superstition. A trade, a little sugar for whatever the storm took. That made him laugh again, properly this time, and it lifted the room a little, like opening a window. In the morning, the light came in thin and pewter. The maple at the curb had dropped half its leaves in one tantrum, and they lay matted to the street like wet feathers. I made French toast the way David liked, too much cinnamon, powdered sugar that gets on your nose if you're not careful. Mark ate slow, like he wanted the taste to take its time. We didn't talk heavy. He asked what I did. I told him I kept books for Russell's Hardware on Main, the kind of place that sells the exact screw your grandfather used in 1964 and knows which drawer to find it in. He said he worked construction when there was work and odd jobs when there wasn't. The calluses on his hands had testified to something like that the moment he walked in. I asked about his car, and he said maybe it just needed a jump. I said maybe we'd be lucky, and we both knew that luck was a word people use when they don't want to say prayer. We took my truck down the road. The ditch glared up, muddy and mean. His sedan sat tilted and ashamed, but not ruined. We hooked the tow strap, and my neighbor buddy, yes, that's his name, and yes, he lives up to it, came out with his coffee and a headshake that said city folks, though Mark wasn't one. The three of us hauled, cursed politely, and finally the car came up with a sucking sound, as if the earth didn't want to give back what it had borrowed. It coughed to life after the cables kissed, then settled into a relieved idle. Mark grinned at the engine like a parent watching a toddler take a first wobbly step. "You saved me," he said. "That makes us even," I told him, though of course it didn't. Back at the house, he insisted on fixing the downed gutter spike by the porch. He said it like a peace offering, but the way he gathered the ladder and checked the footing said he needed to pay the bill his pride wrote last night. He worked careful, not showy. I held the base of the ladder and tried not to think about all the things that can go wrong in 1 second if a person lets their mind wander. When he came down, he looked around like a mechanic hearing a new sound in a familiar engine. "That hinge on your back gate's about to split," he said. "You got a spare?" I almost laughed. Of course I did. I brought him the bin from the garage. He sorted through it like a man praying with his hands, choosing the right hinge by weight and feel. It struck me then, this was a person who still knew how to help, even when he couldn't help himself. We ate lunch, leftover French toast, because life is short and rules are silly, and he checked the weather on his phone. The map showed more rain later. He said he should get going, catch the dry window. I felt something pinch in my chest at the idea of the door closing behind him and the house returning to its old quiet. I ignored it, because attachment to a stranger in 24 hours is not a problem a reasonable woman advertises, and because small towns also teach you how to keep your private kindnesses private. When he picked up his wallet to leave, the photo slid halfway out. He pushed it back with his thumb, and I saw the brief flinch in his face, not the pain of remembering, but the pain of choosing to. It made me say the thing I hadn't planned to. "You can sit in the hallway," I said. He looked at me, puzzled. "When it thunders," I added. "If you want." That's what we did. David had a heart like a kicked beehive, and big noises made him go still. The hallway felt safe because it had walls close enough to feel. The minute the words were out, I worried I'd offered too much of a blueprint into my private life, but he nodded, thoughtful, like I'd given him a map he might use later. He stood there a second too long, then held out his hand. I shook it. His grip was warm, honest. He thanked me again, not the throwaway kind, but the one people say when they're logging a debt they can't repay in money. "Drive safe," I said, which in our county is both a wish and a command. If the road by the creek looks like a mirror, don't be the first one who tests it. He smiled at that, and it reached his eyes this time. He left. The house inhaled the quiet the way it always does when the door shuts and the radiator has the floor again. I washed dishes slowly, because evening stretches its legs differently when it's working off a storm. I put the towel he used into the hamper with a ridiculous care, like it had become heirloom by proximity to someone else's grief. I told myself to stop being dramatic. 2 hours later, the rain returned. So did the thunder. When the first crack came closer, meaner, I thought, involuntarily, of a boy named Evan in a paper crown, and of a note about fear that was written not to me, but had arrived anyway. My phone buzzed. I wiped my hands on my jeans and checked. Unknown number, local code. I answered because here we still do. "Hi," he said, and the word trembled like the branch outside my window. "I'm sorry to call. I'm near the county line. The road's bad." I pulled over. "I know this is," he didn't finish, didn't need to. I told him to put the hazards on, to breathe, to count between lightning and thunder the way you teach a kid to measure storms in miles. He did, out loud, like a man repeating a prayer he only half believes. 3. 2. 1. The thunder landed. "It's close," he said, and his voice made me picture his hands white-knuckled on a steering wheel that smelled like damp and old coffee. "You can come back," I heard myself say before my sensible voice caught up. "If you want. The couch is still warm." He didn't answer right away. I filled the time with logistics: turn around at the feed store, avoid County Road D because the low spot makes a liar out of your headlights, hit the pothole at Jenkins Slough or you'll bend something you can't afford to replace. Finally, he said, "Are you sure?" And I said, I wouldn't say it if I wasn't, and that was true in a way that surprised me. 20 minutes later, his headlights curved into my driveway and laid twin silver bars across the porch like a blessing. He came in with the weather on his jacket and an apology on his mouth. I waved the apology away like smoke. We did the ritual again: shoes off, towel, tea. It was almost funny, a rehearsal of small kindnesses, as if seeing weather repetition could make them permanent. The thunder moved off by degrees, and with it, the tension in his shoulders. He sat on the couch, and I sat in the hallway, my back against the wall. After a moment, he left the couch and slid down opposite me, mirroring the posture without comment. We stared at the crooked family photo I'd never bothered to straighten because David liked it that way, the two of us slightly off-center, like a joke only we understood. Mark said, "He must have been a good man," and I nodded, because good is the only word large enough to contain the specific and the ordinary. He said, "Evan used to count the seconds too, and we counted together then. Two adults in a dim hallway, trading numbers like beads." When the storm thinned to far-off grumbles, he exhaled in that way people do when a noise inside them has finally found the door. He told me more, not everything, but enough. They had fought in the end, he and the boy's mother, about rhythms and routines and who was more tired and who got to say stop. He had said something small and stupid that turned into something large and cruel because words in a kitchen at midnight do that. He had left for a night that turned into too long, and when he came back the house had a different gravity, and then hospitals had the rest of the say. He didn't drink anymore, he added quickly, not like before, and if he heard judgment in my silence, he was wrong. What he heard was a woman reconstructing a timeline. Not to prosecute, but to understand the way people fail each other and still deserve to be helped to their feet. We didn't fix anything in that hallway. We didn't pretend to. But something like stitching began, a small mending where a tear had been widening for years. When we finally stood, my knees complained and he laughed at the sound his own made. I gave him the spare blanket again and left the bat where it was because rituals work until they don't, and you don't throw them out on a night they're still useful. I slept deeply, like the house had wrapped itself around us both and said enough for now. In the morning, sun hit the maple in a way that turned each leaf into a small green window. I made coffee that tasted richer than it had any right to. Mark checked the weather like a man checking a pulse, steady, cooperative. He said he needed to move on, and I could tell the decision was less about the sky and more about a line he'd drawn inside himself that said you don't get to stay where it's safe forever. He gathered his things, which didn't amount to much beyond a jacket that had lost the battle with last night's rain. I wrapped him half a loaf of the sourdough because that's what women in this town do when they don't have the words to bless you. At the door, he hesitated, then pulled his wallet from his pocket. He slid the photo of Evan out, kissed his finger and tapped the boy's forehead the way I've seen fathers do at Little League fields, then tucked the picture back. "Thank you," he said, and I could hear more behind it: for the eggs, for not asking too much, for letting me be a stranger without making me prove I should be allowed to be human in your house. He stepped onto the porch. I half expected the day to swallow him whole the way days do when you're not looking. He turned back once, raised his palm, lowered it. He left. I stood at the window longer than necessary, watching the road that had so many stories folded into it: delivery trucks, school buses, a woman with her grief learning to drive again. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. At lunch, while I was tallying invoices for Russell's, 2 boxes of deck screws, 1 porch light, paint in a shade called teal lake that never looks like it does on the card, the bell over the shop door chimed, and I looked up into a face I recognized in that way you recognize someone by the set of their mouth when they're bracing for a conversation they don't want to have but know they must. It wasn't Mark. It was a woman about my age, hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail, a tired kind of pretty that comes from not having time to think about being pretty. She asked for masonry nails. Then she said my name, careful, like she was checking pronunciation against a memory. I nodded, confused, ready to be friendly in the way you are when someone knows you because this town teaches you you're always known by someone. She introduced herself, first name only. It didn't ring. Her hands were steady but empty in the way hands look when they've rehearsed holding papers that aren't there. And then she said, I'm looking for a man who might have come through here this week. He carries a photo. A boy with a paper crown. The room shifted, like when a cloud passes over and your eyes take a moment to recalibrate. I set the nails on the counter and made a decision I didn't yet understand. We should talk, I said, and I heard a drum far off, thunder or my heart. I couldn't tell. I led her to the back of the store, away from buddy hammering shelves and the sound of the radio that never quite stayed on one station. I poured us both coffee from the thermos that sat near the register, the kind that tastes like yesterday but still warms your hands. She looked around like she wasn't sure if she should sit or stand, like every inch of her body had been waiting for permission to rest for years. You said a photo, I started carefully. She nodded. A little boy, 7, Evan, she said, and the name caught in her throat the way cold air does when you step outside too fast. He used to carry that picture everywhere. His father keeps it now. He disappears sometimes. When it storms. I said nothing at first, because truth has a way of stretching the air thin before it lands. He was here, I said finally. 2 nights ago. The storm knocked him straight to my porch. She pressed a hand over her mouth and closed her eyes, but no tears came. Just that quiet relief that looks almost like grief wearing a softer coat. He's okay, I added quickly. He's driving. Eating. Breathing. Trying. She opened her eyes and whispered, trying's more than he's done in a long time. I told her he'd left yesterday morning heading north, that the road was clear and the rain had eased, that he looked lighter somehow, like someone who'd found a piece of the sky he'd lost. She nodded, staring into her cup, then said, he doesn't talk about Evan. Not to anyone. I used to think silence was punishment, but I think now it's the only language he still knows. I didn't have the right words for that kind of knowing, so I gave her something small instead. He fixed my gutter, I said, and she laughed, a brittle, surprised sound that broke into a real one by the end. He always needs to fix something, she said. It's how he apologizes. She reached into her bag, pulled out an envelope, held it like something dangerous. He left this behind months ago, she said. A letter. I couldn't open it. I think he meant it for someone who'd listen better than me. She slid it across the counter. My name wasn't on it, but I took it because she needed me to. She thanked me for the coffee, for the silence, for being someone her story could touch without judgment. When she left, I turned the envelope over in my hands 3 times before I finally tore it open. The paper inside was creased and stained like it had been carried too long in a pocket that wasn't ready to let it go. The handwriting matched the note on the back of the photo. If you're reading this, it means I'm still looking for forgiveness, or maybe just a place to set the guilt down for a while. I don't know if there's a word for the space between what we did and what we meant, but that's where I live now. If you find me there, I'll probably still be counting seconds between thunder and light. Tell him I'm trying to be the kind of man the sky could clap for. I folded it back up and slipped it into the drawer under the counter, next to David's old screwdriver set. That night the clouds gathered again, as they always do here, over fields that never tire of soaking in what falls from above. The wind picked up. I left the porch light on, not as an invitation exactly, but as a memory of one. Around 9, the phone rang once and stopped. No message. Just that single pulse of connection, like a heartbeat, like someone out there had touched the line long enough to say, still here. I stood by the window watching the storm edge closer, the lightning tracing the hills like veins in an old hand. Somewhere out on the road, a man was counting seconds again, and maybe this time, when the thunder came, it didn't scare him. Maybe it reminded him. Maybe it even sounded like applause. I didn't pray out loud, but I whispered anyway, he's safe. Let that be enough. Then I turned off the kitchen light, sat in the hallway like we used to, and waited for the thunder to clap, not to frighten, but to tell me we'd both finally made it through the same storm.